Hello fear seekers, and welcome back to the channel. Demons are entities that are described in almost all holy books of all cultures. Perhaps we can attribute their popularity to their ready inclusion in pop culture and paranormal media, but they long predate these. Today, we're going to be diving into some disturbing, true demon horror stories. So sit back, hold your crucifixes close, and get ready to ferment your fears. I am a 6'2", rather fit man. I practice Aikido and can bench press 240. My father and his brothers are pretty much as tall as I am. Maybe less strong due to age, although most of them have been in fighting sports for a while. One of my aunts is about 5'4", probably weighs like 110 pounds at best. There was this time when she really went plain crazy. She would get incredibly angry and out of control at random times, spitting nonsense words, and there would be absolutely no way I, or my father, or both of us would be able to get her down. This felt like DBZ Yamcha trying to get Perfect Cell into a UFC submission. She had 10 times my strength. We needed to be 4 to actually pin her down and get her to stop moving until she calmed down. That was extremely scary. She could just pop off any time and go crazy. Now, I didn't believe in the supernatural, but my grandmother, a rather traditional Moroccan woman, was convinced she was possessed. And honestly, it really felt like it. For those who don't know it, Morocco has a pretty big culture about supernatural, sorcery, possession, exorcism stuff. So most of the elders in the family firmly believe in it. Fast forward a few months later when it was getting way too difficult for us to handle her. My uncle contacted a good friend in Morocco who has an exorcist in his family. The exorcist asked us to do one rather twisted thing. He asked my aunt if she could put a drop of her blood in a glass of water and leave the glass somewhere in the apartment while she's sleeping, not next to her. We were reluctant, but my grandmother forced her to do it. In the morning, the glass was empty. I'm still convinced she probably just woke up at night and drank it, but the exorcist version was she is possessed by a demon, commonly known in the Muslim culture as jinn or jinn. Giving him this blood was just a way for you to welcome him and calm him down temporarily, and she needs to see an exorcist ASAP. Now, we were getting convinced he was right, and seeing her often getting crazier and crazier. In desperate times, sometimes you just chose to believe in any possible solution. So at this point, I decided to believe in what he said, and we had to go get proof that he was right. We live in France. We decided to drive to Morocco, about 1,500 kilometers driving plus a 6-hour boat ride, plus 500 kilometers in Morocco again. During the drive, I've never been as scared as this day. I was sitting down behind, on the right, my father on the left, and my aunt between us. She went crazy at some point. We couldn't really hold her as she was trying to hit my uncle who was driving. We almost ran into a wall. My father had to, dangerously, choke her until she lost some strength. Anyway, here we are in Morocco, getting to this village named Sefrou, known as one of the biggest places in the country where sorcery happens. Rather creepy place, and not in a conventional creepy way. What we know of creepy are just what horror movies picture. The African creepy is on another level. We get to meet this exorcist guy. He asks us to buy a sheep to sacrifice and tells us we should bring him the sheep's guts back to him for the exorcism to happen. My father and uncle take care of this. Me? I am scared. As stated earlier, I didn't believe in that stuff. I decided to because honestly the situation called for it. But at this point, in a freaking spooky village in the middle of Morocco, where we are advised to never eat anything outside or accept anything from strangers who might try to curse us, where everything looks twisted AF. I was really losing it and couldn't wait to leave this place forever. On the following day, we went to the exorcist, bringing him these guts. He puts them in a bowl, asks that if we are feeling strong enough, we should stay with him as more people would make it easier to exorcise my aunt. Well, I really wanted to leave, but seeing everybody staying, I stayed as well. My aunt is lying down in front of us, next to the bowl. We are sitting down around her holding hands, and the exorcist starts saying stuff I can't understand. It was traditional Arabic and not a Moroccan dialect. He gets sweaty as he talks faster. I see my aunt twitching in what looked like pain. The light went out. Holy crap, I think I peed my pants at this moment. The exorcist screams something. My aunt screams as well. Then total silence. I think the silence was for about 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. The exorcist's assistant then comes in with a lamp, and we see that both my aunt and him are passed out. The bowl is on the floor, and the guts next to it. The guts turn black. I am having goosebumps just writing that and repicturing it. The assistant urges us not to touch the guts at any cost. The exorcist wakes up, goes to put some water on his face, then tells us to follow him. We went to a nearby empty hill on top of it, and he asked us to burn the guts right there, as the demon was now possessing the sheep and we could now get rid of it. Done. I have never seen my aunt showing any problem whatsoever since that day. Her crisis periods never happened again. She never went back to this angry mode. And to this day, that honestly still scares the crap out of me. Just seeing her now gives me the chills. And the worst is, her sons love me, but I really have trouble staying around her as I am genuinely scared, and they obviously don't know why. Sorry for the extra long post, guys. That's actually the first time I have shared this story, and I'm shaking on my keyboard right now. After this event, I grew really interested in the whole Moroccan demon mythology, and I learned a lot about it. Now, I don't believe they exist. I know they exist, and they don't make much difference anyway aside from this kind of event. If you actually want to know more, feel free to ask me details. I actually talked more in detail with the same exorcist guy, and holy crap, the world is big and deep, and we don't understand a tenth of it. My family used to own and run a real estate office. My grandfather owned it and was the boss. My mother managed the rent roll and clients, and I worked there on weekends as a teenager. We worked in a multicultural area, which I always loved, and there was a reasonable Maori Islander community there, a lot of whom were very religious. In one particular property we managed, there was this one family who had 2 sons. One of them played football with my brother, and the other is the subject of this incident. So, this kid was 11, I think, and according to the family, began acting strangely. He'd have violent outbursts, say terrible things, stuff like that. Apparently, he was really seriously out of control. The family called their Baptist, I think, minister, and asked what they should do. Was there even anything they could do? The minister told them that he was free one evening later that week, and he'd bring the things needed for a baptism. He said that he'd perform an exorcism for them, and that a good spiritual leader, good religious people, and a baptism could oust an evil spirit. This particular evening arrived and the minister got all set up. He got his deep tub, which they all filled with water for the baptism. He chose some passages from the Bible that had helped with the exorcism and got the whole family to gather around for support and prayer. Now, Islander families tend to be large. There were aunts and uncles, cousins and grandparents. Everyone was there and willing to help this child. The parents are instructed to bring out the kid, so the father goes in to get him. The kid was a freaking mess. He was described as being like the Tasmanian devil from the cartoons, just all over the place. His dad put the boy over his shoulder and brought him down to where everyone was standing, the kid fighting at every step. But with his father being an absolutely enormous man, he didn't stand a chance. The minister said for everyone to gather around and put their hands on the child and to pray for him. The father held him in the middle of the family group, and everyone reached out their hands to touch the boy who was thrashing around like a wild thing. What I heard was that it seemed like the boy was totally out of control. Time comes for the minister to say whatever it was he said, and then for them to get him into the tub for the baptism, which was supposed to expel the demon they figured was possessing him. The father and an uncle or something were the ones who got him into the tub, and the family stood around praying their hearts out. But the boy tried to escape the second his body hit the water. He put up a crazy fight, and more family members came to get him into the water. Finally, they got him in, and they were able to hold him there. And hold him, and hold him, and hold him. They didn't mean to do it, but they drowned him. He was an 11-year-old boy who was on the cusp of puberty. Of course his behavior was erratic. Of course his attitude was freaking awful. Of course he thought being held down by his own family. What did they think was going to happen? The parents, uncle, and minister were all arrested. The uncle got off on an accessory charge, the parents got 10 years but got out sooner, and the minister got 15 and was in just about the whole time because he was the leader. He should have known better. My mom had to go and talk to the police, be a character witness, talk about the family and the property and whatnot. That certainly wasn't the only awful thing that happened while I worked there, but it was definitely the most traumatic. I have never known what to make of this. The high school I went to was a religious private school. Senior year, it was traditional for the entire senior class to go on a religious retreat up in this remote resort in the mountains with a few teachers. The point of the retreat was to grow closer to each other as a class and also to find God? Experience spirituality? They took away our phones and forbade us from using any form of the internet or communication with the outside world. Then they made us go through a series of soul-bearing exercises and speeches and whatnot. Honestly, pretty cheesy stuff. Not that exciting. On the third day of the retreat, however, the entire grade is in the main hall doing an hour of silent prayer that was pretty much like meditation, but we are supposed to be communicating with God. All of a sudden, there's a huge crash and everyone looks over to see a girl toppled over onto the floor. As everyone stares, she starts writhing around on the ground and screaming, but not screaming in, like, pain. The voice that she was screaming was in a really strange, deep voice and didn't sound like her at all. Someone yelled, "She's seizing!" I remember that because there was a girl in our class who was known to have epileptic seizures and would do it in assembly pretty frequently, but it wasn't the same girl. Then she stood up and started yelling in tongues. Her eyes were rolled up and her head kept twitching back and forth. She started to run all around the room, yelling in an unintelligible, gibberish language, and every now and then she would run at the cross in the middle of the room and then run back, screaming and crying. At first, I honestly thought this was a dumb high school prank to freak everyone out, but if that was what it was, she took it way too far. The teachers tried to calm her down, but she just kept screaming in this weird language. She started pulling on her hair, so one of the teachers called an ambulance, but we all knew it would take a while for them to get to this remote retreat. Another teacher tried to take her by the shoulders, and she dug her nails into his arm really hard and just kept screaming. It took several more minutes to calm her down. The teachers actually evacuated us from the room, and then she just went quiet. They took that girl away that night, though I don't know how. We were all kept in the cafeteria after that, and she never came back to school after the retreat was over. I wasn't friends with her friends, so I don't know if they knew what really happened. Probably expelled for her prank, but maybe not. It went on way too long and convincingly for me to really tell myself that she'd mess around in front of all the teachers like that. It was insane. I don't know. None of the teachers were ever allowed to talk about it when we asked afterward. But that's the story. When I was 14, me and my best friend at the time got a Ouija board and decided to play with it a bit. We got into a dark room at my place, lit some candles, and started the nonsense. Another friend of ours knocked on the door as we tried to contact the spirits. We let her in and resumed. This third person kept mocking as we tried to get the supernatural messages, when, all of a sudden, she passed out. We thought she was joking, but then she opened her eyes and started to talk with a voice that wasn't hers. It was damn scary, but we still thought she could be playing with us. Then she laughed, a horrible laugh, and started to say things that happened to me that I never had said to anyone, and same for my best friend. Candles started flickering and the flames went a bit too high for my skeptical being not to shiver in spite of myself. My best friend ran out of my place straight to her neighbor, who was a candomble's mother of saint. When the woman came to my place and saw her friend, she gasped and told us to help bring the girl to her place. We did so, but not before getting some scratches by not allowing her to get undressed in daylight, calling to some men that were looking at us as we marched towards the Holy Mother's place. Once there, she locked herself with the girl in a room and told us to wait outside. I don't know what happened, but after a couple of hours our friend came out, very tired and didn't remember anything after we let her in and started to play with the Ouija board. The Mother of Saint told us to not play with what we can't control and whatnot. Nowadays, I believe this friend got impressed/suggested with the ritual. The only intriguing thing is the fact that she knew all those secret things about me and my best friend. It was scary for two 14-year-old girls, that's for sure. One of our live-in housekeepers/maids experienced a demonic possession. I was one of the first to discover her. She was shouting obscenities, religious ones, while contorting her body as if she had a seizure. Nothing odd or unnaturally flexible, just thrusting her torso and legs up and down on the bed. She was on the verge of really hurting herself. My first thought was, holy crap, she's having a seizure. I tried to get her into a car and to drive her to a hospital, but she would not stop spazzing out, so we were scared she would hurt herself on the car ride going there. I'd find out later that real seizures really do not last this long. Eventually, we got some neighbors and nearby security guards to pin her down on a mattress for what seemed like an eternity. 1, 2 hours? She would not stop screaming, until our parents came home. I was crying just from how stressful it was, not knowing what exactly was going on, and if our housekeeper would be alright. When my parents heard about what was going on, despite being devout Catholics, they were extremely rational and level-headed about it, and even said, "We are not calling a priest." Eventually, paramedics arrived. The odd and wasteful thing about it was that the housekeeper displayed no other signs that constituted that of a medical emergency. Aside from the screaming and spazzing out and possibly hurting herself, she did not vomit, bleed, or foam at the mouth. It was only when the paramedics gave her a sedative that she calmed down. And this happened a few more times, and we were all a lot more nonchalant about it knowing that it wasn't a medical emergency. But we still had to enlist the help of others to pin her down until she'd finally calmed down, approximately 1 to 2 hours. It also shook me a lot psychologically, as I was kinda young. After she was laid off, I found out much later on that whenever she was possessed, her relatives would simply hogtie her and tie her to the bed, and she would finally calm down. Apparently, as my sister who majors in psych suggested, our housekeeper's tendency to be possessed is a way for her to feed off the attention of others while processing internal stress or turmoil that makes it difficult to cope. I was 2 years into a 3-year jail sentence for robbery when I was transferred to 12 Caesars Correctional Facility in New Mexico. I remember the cellmate I wound up with, this guy named Hector Ochoa. He was an average-looking Joe, part Mexican, part I don't know what. Very low-key, used to spend most of his time reading his Bible, or writing in this alligator-hide notebook he kept tucked into his waistband. I've had a fair few cellmates in my time, but this Hector guy was seriously offbeat. He wasn't violent or anything. He wasn't dangerous in the conventional sense of the word, but he gave off this really creepy vibe. The other inmates steered well clear of him. Not even the gangbangers messed with this hombre. The first few days sharing a cell with him, I was tearing my hair out. I kept thinking there were huge bugs crawling all over my flesh. I couldn't stop scratching. Turns out the bugs were all in my head. Hector slept on the bottom bunk. Every night after lights out, he'd lie there praying in Spanish. He'd pray in this never-ending drone. It drove me crazy. Made it next to impossible to sleep. A couple of nights in, I wake up suddenly. It's maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and for a moment, I'm disorientated. I don't have a clue where I am. I hear this woman whispering in the bunk below me. I can't hear what she's saying, but I know it's a woman. It sounds like Hector and this woman are whispering to each other. That's when I sit bolt upright. Instantly the voices stop, and when I peer into the bottom bunk, I see Hector fast asleep. I would have chalked the whole thing up to my imagination, but that wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. Next day, I met up with a friend of mine, Dave, in the prison refectory. "What the hell is it with this guy?" I asked. Dave gave me this look, so I lowered my voice and said, "You know, my cellie." "Hector?" He nodded. "What about him?" "Dude creeps me out, man." "Yeah, well, you seriously need to watch your back with that guy." Dave tapped his forehead with his finger. "He ain't right, man." "What do you mean, ain't right?" "You seen his tattoo? The one on his back?" I shook my head. "He keeps his shirt on." "Ask him to show it to you." "Why? You know something about it?" "I know what it represents." Hector rarely spoke to me. He was the quietest cellmate I'd ever had. Most cellmates you couldn't get to shut up, but Hector was different. He sat there on his bed, and he might as well have been in solitary for all the cares he gave. I figured I couldn't just come out and ask to see his tattoo, so I broke the ice by showing him a few of mine. I had an image of the Virgin Mary on my left bicep, a rose on my right calf, bayonets crisscrossed against my belly. "Do you have any tats?" I asked. He nodded. I waited, but when it became obvious he wasn't going to say anything else, I pressed him. "Can I see?" He frowned. "Why?" I shrugged. "Just curious." He stared at me for a while, and then he set his Bible aside and shrugged his shirt off as he stood up. He turned around so I could see his back. As I stared at his tattoo, I felt slow fingers of what the hell creeping up my spine. The tattoo took up the entire surface area of his back. It displayed a woman. She was tall and painfully emaciated, with bloodshot eyes that bulged horribly out of their sockets. Her flesh was corpse pale, and she wore a grin that split her face from ear to ear. That grin was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. She looked demonic. I could literally feel her eyes boring into mine. "Jesus," I muttered. "Sonriendo boca," Hector said as he put his shirt back on. "What?" He turned to face me. "Lady grinning mouth," he said. "You heard of her?" I shook my head. "You wear her image," he said, "and no one's going to mess with you, S.A." According to Hector, there were shamans in the rural areas of Mexico, bruja, who could invoke spirits through something he called black tattoos, but you had to shed innocent blood before you got one of those tattoos. You had to cut the throat of a virgin, drain her blood into a copper vessel. The blood would be mixed with ink. The ink would be mixed with the semen of a black goat. Only then could the tattoo be drawn. If you survived the ensuing infection, you became a doorway. Your guardian angel lived on the other side of that door. Lady Grinning Mouth was Hector's guardian angel. Now, there were a lot of dangerous men in our jail, but one of them in particular, Diego Gomez, aka the Machine. Now he was the guy that bothered me the most, because no one else would mess with me on account of Hector being my cellie. But Diego? He wasn't afraid of Hector. In fact, quite the opposite. He made it pretty clear that he wanted Hector's hide hanging on his cell wall. The fight between Hector and Diego Gomez went down like this. Diego was serving life for double homicide. No chance of parole. Nothing to lose but his life, and that life was a living hell. The only thing that meant anything to him was his rep. He heard about Hector soon after he was transferred to our jail. He knew the other prisoners respected Hector, were afraid of Hector. He wanted that respect. He wanted that fear. He was a monster of a man, 6'4", 220 pounds of solid muscle, and so many freaking tattoos he looked like the illustrated guide to end times. I passed him a couple of times in the exercise yard, and I can honestly say Diego Gomez was one heathen SOB you didn't want to mess with. But when I told him Diego was gunning for him, Hector didn't even glance up from his Bible. "He don't have no guardian angel," he said contemptuously. A couple days later, Diego launched an unprovoked attack on Hector in the prison gym, almost cracked his skull clean open with a dumbbell. But the guards broke it up in time, and Hector spent the next 2 days in the infirmary, high on morphine whilst they put 21 stitches in his head. They would have stuck Diego in solitary, but Hector wouldn't snitch on him and the guards weren't too clear on who started the fight, so in the end, Diego got off scot-free. When he came back to our cell, his head all bandaged up, Hector had this darkness in his eyes, like he could skin a rattlesnake with his raw teeth. I didn't say anything to him. In jail, you quickly learn when a man wants to be left alone. But that look in his eyes. Right at that moment, I wouldn't have traded places with Diego Gomez for all the whores in Detroit. That night, Hector is lying on his bunk, chanting all this weird stuff in this language I'd never heard before. I don't speak Spanish, but I know what Spanish sounds like, and this wasn't Spanish. This was some tribal sounding stuff. It creeped me out. The cell was cold. Things didn't feel right. I felt those bugs crawling all over my flesh again and I couldn't stop scratching. Freaking things were driving me insane. After a long while, that sensation of insects started to fade until it got to a point it wasn't a bother no more. I was drifting in and out of sleep after that, and it was about an hour later when all of a sudden Hector stopped spraying. After the continuous murmur of his voice, the silence pressing down on my ears was almost ominous. I lay there on the top bunk, staring at a spot on the ceiling, and slowly, the ambient sounds of the prison began to reinsert themselves. The coughing, the snoring, the distant clangs, the echo of faraway voices, and then suddenly, I felt the bunk shift slightly, and I sensed someone standing up from the bottom bunk. I figured Hector was getting up to use the toilet, so I kept on lying there, eyes half closed, and I could just make out Hector's shadow to the left of me. He was just standing there, not moving. That seemed a bit strange, so I opened my eyes and turned my head to ask him what was wrong. I swear to Christ I still have nightmares about what I saw standing there. It wasn't Hector. It was the woman from Hector's freaking tattoo. Only she wasn't a tattoo no more. She was standing about a foot from me, and she was staring down at me with those bulging, bloodshot eyes, and she had this grin that split her face in half. Oh Jesus, that damn grin. I can't wipe the memory of it. Doesn't matter how many bottles of Wild Irish Rose I drink. Doesn't matter how many shots of tequila I knock back. I can't stop seeing that grin. It was the most horrific thing you could imagine. She had black lips and long yellow teeth, and her mouth was stretched so wide apart that there was no way her jaw hadn't dislocated. I couldn't move. I just wanted to leap off that bunk. I just wanted to scream in damn horror, but I couldn't move. It was a wide awake nightmare, and that demon's face no more than a foot from mine. Pale corpse skin and long black hair plastered to her skull, and that grin, neon bright and 5 miles wide, and my mind was caving in on itself. I was going insane staring at that thing. And then, to my enormous relief, she turned away from me and slipped out through the bars of our cell. A moment later, I sat bolt upright on my bunk and dragged in a wheezing breath. Jesus, what the hell? I jumped out of bed and instantly I saw Hector lying on his belly on the bunk. His eyes were rolled all the way up in his skull, so I could only see the whites. His prison shirt had been dragged all the way up, exposing his bare back. I crouched down beside him. The tattoo on his back was missing. Breath left me in a low, involuntary whistle. His back was bare. It was like that damn thing had climbed right up out of his skin. I kept telling myself that was knee-deep crazy, but in my gut, in my balls, I knew that's exactly what had happened. I crouched quivering in a corner of the cell and waited until that monster came back. I knew sooner or later she would return, and I was petrified. I hadn't felt this scared since I was a little boy. That grin, those eyes. Jesus, I was literally peeing myself in terror. I kept whispering to myself, "Please don't notice me, don't notice me, don't notice me, please, Jesus, please, don't look in my direction." All that while Hector lay on his belly, his eyes rolled up to whites, and every now and then he'd undergo this violent series of convulsions, or else he'd start whispering in Spanish, but for the most part he'd lie there, still as a corpse. I kept my attention fixed on the bars of the cell, the small square of passage visible beyond. My heart was pounding against the walls of my chest. My lips were moving silently and I realized I was praying. I hadn't prayed in 15 years. After about 10 minutes or so, I felt the air grow chill and tense, and the hairs started crawling on my scalp. She was coming back. I knew she was coming back. I made this involuntary mewling sound and tried to push myself further back into the shadows, but the wall of the cell was pressed right up against my back. I'd reached my limit. I was trapped in my own nightmare. The lights in the passage started flickering violently, like Morse code, and then suddenly, without warning, she was there, peering at me through the bars of the cell. I could see that grin like a ghastly wound splitting her face, eyes burning into my soul, voice whispering in my brain, telling me, "It's a joke. It's all a joke. Everything's a freaking joke." Over and over. And after a while, I realize I'm grinning, wide as a lunatic, and weeping blood. I can't stop the tears from flowing, because everything's a joke. God help me. My whole life has been a freaking joke. The monster slips back through the bars of the cell and glides across to the bunk. She pauses for a second, staring down at Hector. I'm slamming the heel of my hands against my head, trying to get rid of the voices. I'm hooking my fingers into my mouth, digging into my jawbones, trying to erase that grin. Can't stop freaking grinning. Can't stop weeping. Blood. Blood. Jesus, I'm bleeding from the eyes, hemorrhaging regrets. Dear God, I'm sorry. Sorry. Hello? Anyone out there? Anyone reading? Everything is real. Nothing is... Nothing. Nothing. Don't you see? The joke? I'm dreaming me, dreaming you, dreaming me. Damn, damn, damned. And then the monster lays down on top of Hector, and there's a moment of intense visual distortion, like a movie with several frames missing. And then she's gone. I continue to sit there, staring at Hector, and slowly but surely, I feel the pressure easing in my jaws, the grin slowly relaxing, fading, and then I'm dragging in huge gulps of air as I scramble to my feet. I peer down at Hector. The tattoo has appeared on his back again. The demon glares up at me from his flesh, grinning wide as the moon, and quickly I reach out and drag Hector's shirt down across it, covering it, erasing it. It's all a joke. Everything. Rumors are like contagion in a prison. Neither walls nor bars can stop them. I can't sleep the rest of that night. No one can. 5 minutes after the demon returned, Diego Gomez started laughing. He was 6 cells up from me, and at first he started chuckling, real low, like the way somebody laughed when they'd remembered something funny. That kind of chuckle. And then, after a while, he was laughing out loud, and convicts were calling out and advising him he better shut the hell up. And other convicts laughing as well, but they kinda got the joke. But no one got the joke like Diego got the joke. By this time he was literally shrieking with laughter. I've never heard anything so unnerving. He wasn't laughing the way a sane person laughs. You could actually hear the desperation in his voice, like laughing was the only way he could scream. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know what the hell makes sense anymore. Everyone was awake. You could see them standing in their cells, peering silently out through the bars, but no one was yelling out for Diego to quit laughing anymore. You only had to hear Diego's laugh to know something wasn't right. After a while, the lights went on, and the guards came to see what was wrong. They passed my cell on the way to Diego's. I was standing close to the bars. Hector was standing with me by this time. We watched the guards rush past, yelling and cursing, and then, when they got to Diego's cell, they stopped yelling and they stopped cursing, and I heard one of them say, "Holy!" And that's when everything went nuts. The guards rushing about like lunatics, calling for paramedics, calling for restraints, everyone screaming at once. And through it all, Diego never once stopped laughing. I turned to Hector. Hector was nodding as he listened to Diego laugh. He was nodding like he got the joke. "He don't have no guardian angel," he said softly. Diego Gomez, aka The Machine, strangled his cellmate, a guy called Chad Beacon, to death with his bare hands. Rumor had it Diego Gomez exerted so much pressure that Chad's eyes hemorrhaged and his skin literally turned black. He was laughing whilst he strangled Chad. After killing his cellmate, Diego reached up and tore his own eyes out of his skull. He kept on laughing the whole time. No one knows why he did it, but some inmates in close-by cells swear to God they saw a woman in Diego's cell shortly before things went crazy. She was whispering to him. She must have been telling him something pretty funny, because Diego was grinning from ear to ear. Hi guys, glad to see you made it to the end of the video. I don't know about you, but that last story is going to keep me up. Being incarcerated seems like it would already be bad enough, but throw in a demon, and I'm definitely noping out. Alright guys, that just about wraps up the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So long, Fear Seekers. I'll see you in the next video.